What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. Jumping back into the SCP universe here with the next bit of red tape. We're going to be jumping into Fratricide, an Amoni story. It's a pretty long video. I guess both parts, the Exploring series has done both parts together in one video. It's like 3.5 hours long, so we're probably going to break this down into a few different parts, and I might release them individually and then one long one, etc. We'll see how it goes. But so yeah, we might break this down to a couple different parts, or I might just put it all together in one really long video. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, so yeah, links down below as always in the description to the original video without my commentary interaction, and to the Exploring series channels. Please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video as we go along through it, be sure to go over there and give it a like and hit that sub button on his channel. If you enjoy the content the Exploring series puts out, he makes a lot of great, content, so definitely deserves the love. If you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live with my YouTube members, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the members benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So been around the channel for a while, I want to take your support to the next level, take a look at that. And if you enjoy this video with my commentary and reaction, do consider leaving a like and a sub. That helps me and the channel grow and lets the YouTube algorithm gods know you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see some more. So thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you taking the time out to do so. Hope you enjoy the video. Let's get in it.
Fratricide, an Amoni story.
It's interesting how we've kind of come full circle here with we kind of started off with the Amoni, and then we went on to the Davites, and now we've had a few other stories in between, and etc., and now we're coming back to Amoni. So it makes me wonder where. It's just interesting how the Exploring series has this playlist set up.
Part 1. I've said this before, and it's certainly a point that's going to continue to be repeated as time goes on, but the SCP universe has expanded quite a lot over the years, from its humble beginnings of creepy monsters. Whether that's a good thing is of course going to be a matter of personal opinion, but when a universe continues to be fleshed out, there's obviously going to be all manner of stories told. While the Church of the Broken God started out as a creepy cult that worshipped machines, we now have various expansive takes on their history and mythos.
It does make me wonder, right? Like, the original author that kind of was created the idea of the Church of the Broken God and the SCP universe, etc. Like, where did they get that idea from? Was it kind of sort of their own creation? Did they take inspiration from like the Mechanicus from 40K or some other kind of stories or universe, because it is very similar to me from what I know of 40K. The Omnissiah is their god. Kinda, it's not really like comparable to Meccan, but still the same kind of idea. The machine spirit and the Omnissiah, and I don't know. It's just interesting.
The history of Amoni, the Mechanites' greatest city, is one paved largely in blood, and while one of the SCP-001 proposals took a look at the city mostly in the modern day, there's still a lot of history left to be uncovered. The story we're going to be looking at today takes place many years in the past, when Amoni was still in its prime. While there are anomalous elements to the story, of course, it's a tale grounded enough in real-world concepts and emotions. I'll be reading most of this tale verbatim, but I will be paraphrasing certain elements, mostly dialogue, so of course I recommend reading the full story yourself to get the complete experience. Let's take a look.
Let us.
Chapter 1. The two princes chased each other around the courtyard. The palace's inner walls sheltered them, dappled sunlight falling across the tilework and fountains, across the gold mosaics and orange facades. They panted, laughed, shrieked, the younger running after the older until, limber and long-legged, he tackled his brother to the ground, both falling in a heap. When he opened his mouth to laugh again, he tasted copper. He pressed a hand to his mouth, looking at it in disbelief. Blood. His nose was twisted, gushing blood freely. For a moment, he didn't realize what had happened, until he looked up and saw his brother's eyes turned cold and sharp, foulard fist streaked with red. In a second, their nursemaids swept in with their long, flowing dresses, one hastily separating the two boys while the others pressed cloths to his face to stem the flow, clucking and fussing over him. The last thing the prince saw before the nursemaids crowded around him, blocking his view, was the sharp, offended eyes of his brother. How dare you? How dare you? The field had been so very deafening a few hours ago. Now it was painfully quiet and still. No more captains shouting orders. No more Deva pushing the line. Just a sea of dead bodies, knee-deep and horizon far. Mechanites mixed with Deva, mixed with beasts, mixed with nobody at all. Blood and oil flowing freely into the dirt, mixing into a thick, red mud. It coated everything. The severed foulard limbs lying in the mire, the bleached and burned skulls of the war beasts, Biliath's golden armor as she picked her way through the endless carcasses, the men she commanded, and the men she killed. Vultures danced overhead, patiently waiting to have their turn. They always got their turn, nowadays. A Deva corpse shuddered to her right. She didn't hesitate, plunging the tip of her sword into its soft nape. The flesh gave way, the bone rent, and it gave a final death rattle before falling still again. She wiped the sword on the body's tunic before returning to her slow march across the field. No prisoners, Kabar had told her. No prisoners and no quarter. Anyone who fell, died. Never mind that the Deva had no regard for their own lives and would fight to the last man, prisoner or otherwise.
I had mentioned that, right, in one of my other videos. Like, you think about the Davite attitude in with when it comes to war and fighting, right? Like, you have a bunch of slaves that are essentially out there fighting, and they're told that when they die, they'll be reincarnated as Davites. You know, they won't be humans anymore. They won't be slaves. They'll be reincarnated as Davites, and they'll have a better life. You know, in the cycle of reincarnation. So, like, them going out and fighting and dying, you know, their death is actually a reward. They get to return as a higher, quote unquote, life form according to their beliefs. So, like, yeah, I'm sure they would be out there fighting to the very last with no quarter given.
Never mind that the bodies they left were easy fodder for the man-eaters later. It was fine. The legions followed her word, not his. She would, quietly, give the order to burn the bodies when the mud, thick with blood, receded. Kabar would rage silently, but he would not do anything. To her, anyway. She spied another body twitching a few feet away and gingerly stepped between dead, tangled limbs to approach it. A wet crunch. Her foot landed on the head of a half-transformed Deva, face formed into a horrific visage. The viscera sprayed across her once shining greaves. She grimaced and raised her sword again. Behind her, as the sun set, she could hear horns carried over the wind. The siege of Tambarat continued. It was the latest front in the First War, the crusade waged against the aggressor nations in defense of the borders of the Empire. They had pushed back against the...
I still do wonder, like, who really started everything, right? Like, you know, from the Meccans' point of view, the other factions are the aggressors. The Davites' point of view, the opposite's true. I really do wonder, like, what the tipping point was, who fired the first shot, so to speak, etc., and really sparked everything off between all three of them. Maybe it was the Abominant, and Black Star and their faction. Maybe they, as a means of consolidating and building their forces, got these three factions to start fighting amongst themselves in an effort to, have them focus on them, focus upon each other, while Black Star and the Abominant in the shadows, took their time, really built up their forces, prepared their armies, and once they were ready, they struck.
The Deva's incursion, setting fire to the jungles the sorcerers raised as defense. The fire spread virulently from tree to tree, copse to copse, forest to forest, vast swath of jungle to jungle, until there were only vast plains of ash, charred bodies twisted in agony. Every spear length of land they retook from the Deva was paid for in gallons of mechanite blood. But it was paid for in full, and they took their righteous prize. And now they had pushed the monstrosities back all the way here, to Tambarat, a fortress city resting between two rivers at the point where they pushed closest to one another, not quite touching. A wide, shallow city, and in the spring thaw the rivers became impassable rapids, a natural barrier. Biliath had pleaded with Kabar to hold the siege until winter, when the glaciers feeding the rivers would refreeze and the water would become passable, maybe even frozen thick enough to move troops and siege engines over, if they were lucky. He had ignored her, of course, so she had enlisted Haram's help. He was her opposite, Kabar's left hand as she was his right. The general of the expeditionary armies, he and his forces had been pushing in the far east, carving a bloody path across the southern lands of the Nalka and the northern borders of the Deva, pushing west until they met the Golden Legion at Tambarat. Haram came from the east, Biliath came from the west, and the city and its defenders squeezed between their armies, they had pled with Kabar to hold the siege for a few months. From his tent on the hill overlooking the city, he had looked at them. Stocky, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, the piercing golden eyes marking him as a Bumaro, now laid upon the two of them. Haram went first, telling his lord that his forces tire, waging bloody war in a foreign land. They have not seen the temples of Kaya Ram in many years, and the towers of Amoni Ram in even longer. He fears that they will not be able to take the city for many months. Downhill, the armies were camped, thousands of men sitting in the mud around sparse fires, setting up canvas tents and wool cots to rest their heads for a few precious hours.
You'd think with their technology, right, they would have the ability to transport their troops back and forth quicker than the other factions, right? I mean, granted, the Mechan's Grace was like an experimental technology that let them transport Monoram. It was supposed to let them like move it wherever they wanted to, but I guess it malfunctioned originally, and that they just got put into some kind of pocket dimension. But even so, right? They have technology of flight, things like that. So you would think they'd be able to transport troops back and forth, and obviously in war, one of the things that's you know big is getting troops rested. So you know shuffling troops in and out, you would think would be a tactic they would use. But it also comes down to a numbers game. Do they have enough numbers to do that with what they're trying to do? But it kind of strikes me, right? Like, again, with their technological advancement, you would think they'd be able to um even move troops around to other I mean we don't really know exactly what their capabilities are, right? you know um do they have flying machines? We know that they have soldiers that can fly, so you would think that they would be able to create um transport machines. I mean, they have massive Colossus, you know, siege engines that are hundreds of feet tall that can decimate armies on their own, kind of a thing. So if they could have that, you would think they'd have the capability of creating planes or helicopters or some kind of flying machines that could be used to bombard, or bombers, fighters, transport ships, et cetera, and be able to move their troops around a bit more efficiently. But anyway, let's continue.
Haram spoke truth. They were the bravest of the Empire, and still they were exhausted after an endless, bloody campaign. The prince had cocked his head, face impassive. The inside of his tent was cast alight by the setting sun, rays bouncing across the treasures seized from the Deva during this campaign. Wooden shields inlaid with gold, intricate carvings of war beasts and marble statuettes of elephants, polished blades and spears made for hands much larger than a man. The tiger skin rug the two generals stood on as Prince Kabar sat in a stolen throne completed the image. Seizing the silence, Biliath offered her support, stating her agreement that their infantries are depleted. She bit her tongue for a moment before continuing, telling Kabar that their mechanical corps are down to the last few men, and they only have one functional Goliath, cobbled from parts from the fallen. She questions their ability to hold a siege. The sun inched down the horizon before Kabar spoke, asking if their forces fear dying in the name of their emperor. She could practically hear Haram's teeth grind, and she interjected before he could say anything. She assures the prince that that's not the case, but death now is not worth anything, not when they still have a long campaign ahead of them. They must conserve their resources. The prince, however, replies that they must take Tambarat. They must make sure the Deva know that they cannot hide behind their walls of stone and root until their enemies turn tail and run back to their nest to lick their wounds. Haram argues that the Deva have stores of fruit and grain for years and can easily make more, so they cannot simply starve them out.
That's true. That's true, yeah. I hadn't really thought about that too, but the Devites could essentially use their biomancy to never run out of foodstuffs. Like, it would be impossible to use the tactic of trying to blockade them, essentially.
Kabar counters that they will instead burn them out, with siege engines bombarding the city with burning pitch day and night. Biliath points out that the sorcerer Nawabs will repel them, and as Kabar states that they will distract them with direct assaults, Haram exasperatedly argues that they don't have the men.
You would think also that with the Davites' biomancy, they would be easily able to use their plants to burrow tunnels or whatever underground for them to move around through and whatnot. So you would think that even sieging them like that, right? Wouldn't really work out. What's up, Howard?
Kabar, however, casually says that they will fight for him or they will be put to the sword, as will Haram if he raises his voice to him again. He cares little for his victories in the east if he cannot obey his betters. Haram was silent for a moment before bowing, apologizing to his lord. Kabar tells them to go and marshal their armies, as he wants the siege engines set up on the hill before the sun rises. Haram departs, and Biliath turns to follow him when Kabar calls out to her. He states that he expects some insubordination from his men, but she would do well to remember her future after this campaign. There is no room for insubordination in the palace walls. She bowed her head and slipped away. That had been many months ago. Now their heels were dug in, and the siege continued unabated into the beginning of summer. Biliath's hopes that the summer would bring a dry run proved fatally incorrect. The waters of the river rose up as the glacier thawed even faster. The mud and dirt wore and washed away, and one night the banks collapsed, sending half a dozen camps tumbling into the rapids. Before anyone could do anything, the screaming soldiers were snatched by the rushing water, slammed over and over again into the sharp rocks the Deva had placed downriver. She had no idea how long they took to die, but prayed it had been quickly. Morale in the camp grew worse after that, if such a thing was possible. The misery was daily now. Foodstuffs were dwindling. Some of her lieutenants were debating slaughtering their mounts. In the day, soldiers would dig through the newly replenished battlefields for mechanite corpses and drag them back to bury them. And every night when the sun set and the fires across the camp came to life, the battle would begin again. The siege engines, with their deafening combustion, would begin casting balls of burning pitch over the walls into Tambarat. The sorcerer Nawabs would return fire with fist-sized balls of venomous thorns cast down onto the legion by the hundreds as another force would rush whatever part of the walls they felt were weak that day. The Deva pikemen on the walls would stab from above, piercing flesh and foulade. Screaming was the symphony of battle.
And
all the while, Biliath and Haram sat a mile behind the line, safely in camp, while their men fought and died. They drew their plans and maps and adjusted force counts, hearing the distant shouting and screaming. They stared at each other over the map when a particularly devastating round of screams sounded out. Haram begins to voice a concern, but Biliath just shakes her head. Kabar had ordered them back, that they were...
Thinking about it too, right? You would also think that with the Mechan's technology and how it integrates into people, that they would have ways of being able to lessen the effect of pain, right? Like how much you feel, so that you'd be able to fight more efficiently. Like have ways of like actually self-adjusting that, like knowing you're going into battle, turning that sensation of pain down to at least the point to where like you could fight without your body potentially giving away or it having as much of a psychological impact on you.
They were more valuable making the plans and leaving the common soldiers to die for them. He'd said it so casually, as though death in these numbers was not just a consequence, but an unforgettable component of the battle. And of course, he'd ordered her back in particular, stroking her cheek with his still flesh right hand. I couldn't risk my hawk breaking her wings, said so softly that it made her blood boil and her skin crawl. But she had simply nodded and returned to her quarters. So there they were, in the command tent, looking at each other completely helpless as their armies screamed and bled and fought and died. Haram insists that they were meant to lead, and she agrees, as he sighs and puts his dagger down on the table. He asks her if she walked the fields last night, to which she nods, stating, "No prisoners. Not anymore." He tells her to go rest then, and he'll hold the command, but she argues that she's not going to sleep while her men get massacred. Haram remarks that with this prince, she'd never sleep again. It was a seditious comment, maybe, but one she couldn't deny the truth of. The exhaustion was there, encroaching on her now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Dark edges to her vision, her prosthetics weightier than ever. She eventually relents, stating that she'll sleep for a few hours, and Haram nods. She could see the exhaustion on his face, too. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old enough to warrant the lines of worry that had been etched under his eyes. Some small part of her wondered what she looked like now, whether it was the same face she had when she'd set out from Amoni Ram. She put the thoughts away for later and slipped out of the command tent.
Somewhere.
Her own tent was at the edge of the camp. She was afforded some privileges from her position, privacy among them, She didn't trust herself to stay in the air this tired, so she made the trek on foot, stomping through the mud and weaving between the labyrinth of tents and campfires. The soldiers from the units not involved in the attacks were kneeling, warming themselves, eating what rations they could get their hands on. Seeing her approach, they scrambled to their knees to salute, but she waved them down. No point disturbing what little rest they'd get. They settled for weakly raising their fists in a salute, one she returned before passing. Then she stumbled backward, pushed to the side. It was a small group of prisoners. 3 or 4 Deva, dressed in rags and manacled together. Their heads were bowed as they were led along by soldiers. She was going to call out for them to stop until she registered the red-dyed capelet on their shoulders. Imperial guards, not for her to command. That was impossible. They weren't supposed to take prisoners. But she watched them go back the way she had come, torches disappearing into the darkness. One of the prisoners turned for a second, locking eyes with her. She started. He was young, far too young to be a soldier. His face was almost bestial, half transformed into the Deva spirit, jaws drawn back to reveal razor-sharp teeth, curly-haired and dark-skinned, but eyes distinctly rich and brown and human. Then he turned away, and they were gone. She jostled the soldier nearest her, asking where they're going, but he simply replies that he doesn't know. She narrowed her eyes and turned, heading to her tent. It was a small space, but it was distinctly hers. The soldiers respected her. No one would think to enter without her permission, so she had no fear of her possessions being disturbed. It was simple. Her cot, chest, canvas-wrapped weapons, a few mementos from home. A handful of trophies, nothing as ostentatious as Kabar's war loot, but just a few memorable objects she had squirreled away, to remind.
I feel like Mechanite culture, right? Like, other than, I guess, maybe some, like, religious iconography and stuff like that would depict their worship of Mechan, maybe having, like, small altars in their rooms or something like that. I feel like their stuff would be pretty Spartan, right? I wouldn't feel like they would have a whole lot of, like, need or want for decorations. But I guess it all depends on, like, how much of, I guess, the human side of them is still intact, right? And has that, I guess, material want or need to accumulate things, to have things. I mean, like, she's talking about having trophies and stuff right here. So, I mean, obviously there is some of that to, you know, depict her triumphs in battle, I would assume. You know, things like that. But when I think of what a Mechanite's like home would look like, I would think it would be fairly barren, with just essentially the essentials. And again, like maybe some kind of small personal altar or place where they would, you know, worship Mechan, kind of a thing.
Her where she had gone and what she had accomplished. A Deva wood sword, thorns torn from the tree beast she had felled, a little statuette of a dancing scarlet god, and her favorite, a large cage made from finely woven wood containing a number of small forest beasts. They were odd little creatures, the size and shape of frogs, but with 6 legs and mouths full of sharp teeth.
Interesting.
They glowed in the darkness. They were contraband, and no doubt she'd be punished if Kabar found them, but they were her little rebellion. Closing the tent flap behind her, she shook a pinch of dried crumbled meat into their enclosure and watched as the 4 or 5 of them emerged from the sticks and moss she had carefully arranged for them and went for the food. The biggest got there first and bullied the others, pushing them around and snapping its jaws menacingly at its brothers as it ate. When it had gotten its fill and wandered off, she shook in another pinchful for the stragglers. Then she collapsed into bed. Back in the command tent, drawing maps for the next assault, Haram comments that he doesn't know how she suffers him. She lets his comment hang in the air for a moment before addressing it, stating that it's her duty. He responds by asking if it's her duty to follow the commands of a blind, spoiled oaf who knows nothing about war. And when she replies that she wouldn't say that he knows nothing, he concedes that he does know how to kill his men.
I mean, that's often a thing that's happened in history, right? Where people of power have been put in position of things like this that don't really know what they're doing, and they get people killed. Like, that's just how it works. And unfortunately, you know, those under them have to follow orders, because that's how the chain of command works. That's how historically a lot of things have happened. Literal wars have been lost because of that.
She quickly admonishes him, not in Kabar's honor, but purely out of concern that someone might hear. He acknowledges that with a nod, at least, and asks if she heard the reports from last night's assault on the southern flank of the city. He tells her 400.
You would think, though, that, right, like, Bamaro, I'm assuming this is one of Bamaro's kids, right? They're talking about a prince. Bamaro is the emperor, king, whatever you want to call him, right? You would think that, again, as a Mecha Knight, logically, because I would, again, I'm making assumptions here, but you would think that their thought process would be something along the lines of being a bit more logical, right? So, logically speaking, he would understand that his son does not necessarily have the most experience, I guess you could say, in matters of war, right? So he would want someone to accompany him, to advise him. But then I guess, you know, it would still ultimately come down to his choice. And it might be a situation where he just wants to get the war and battle over with so he can return home victorious and get the praise of, you know, his father or whatever, and move on with life. And who cares how many people you sacrifice, you know? So who knows?
400, which she assumes to be injured, but that's the number that died, with twice that many injured. It was an eye-watering number, and she didn't speak for a second before asking the goddess to forgive them. He really doesn't know how long they can sustain this, as disease is tearing through their ranks almost.
I keep forgetting that. I keep forgetting that in this canon, Meccan is a female, is a goddess. Anyway.
As quickly as the Deva are. She replies that they don't have a choice, but he retorts that there's always a choice. Biliath's gaze settled on him, and she asks what he's talking about. He replies that when he was a youth in the Legion, when she would have been but a
you know, it makes me wonder, right? Like, I don't know. I wonder if in this canon, potentially, it could be, right, that, like, Meccan and Yaldabaoth are, like, twins, right? But they're, like, opposites, you know what I'm saying? You know? Meccan is, you know, the goddess of order. Yaldabaoth is the goddess of chaos, kind of a thing. And they could just be twins, but, you know, opposites in that way. I don't know. That just sounds like it would be interesting.
Child, they were waging a campaign against the rebels at Ul-Maram. It was a bloody affair. None of them knew how to make war against other Mechanites, not really. And of course, there's nothing worse for morale than killing your kinsmen. Many of them died on those fields. Too many. He paused for a second, lost.
And that's another thing, right? Like, would a civil war of that way even happen, right? Like, especially with the power of the voice, could Bamaro not instill a programming in them that would say you can't fight each other? You know what I'm saying? Like, would rebellion even be possible at that point? Or not even necessarily rebellion, but just infighting, a civil war of some sort, like, happening because of his ability to, like, use the voice and really command them. But maybe it's something that um wears off over time, or is a situation where the further you get away from Bamaro, his influence isn't as powerful, and so they get more control over their will again, something like that. But even so, then it could just be a situation where, yeah, there's an uprising, a rebellion, whatever, and then Bamaro himself goes and commands them to not do that anymore. Stop being bad.
somewhere else before continuing. Eventually, they had the rebels in a position where they were willing to try and execute their commandant for surrender and leniency. They served.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if he gets into uh like cosmic war stuff or whatever, like what happened with the gods beforehand, like the mythos behind all that.
them with an offer. He was a lieutenant then, and all of the lieutenants brought it to their captain. He listened to the surrender offer very patiently. Then he reached out and took it, and tossed it into the fire. Announced to all of their shocked faces that they would not accept a surrender, and that he would have the commandant's head on his pike before granting an inch of mercy to any traitor of the Empire. Biliath asked what happened, even though she knew the answer. The tale was rumor and mythology in the Legion, oft whispered and never confirmed. She just hadn't realized Haram was its origin. He replies that they roused the next morning to find him in his tent, throat slit and bleeding like a stuck pig.
Yikes.
A rebel traitor must have snuck into the camp at night and cut him down. He said it bluntly and dispassionately. She states aloud about the rebel traitor, almost as a question, and Haram just says, yes. It hung in the air, weighty and full of implication. She says to him to not tell her something that she cannot let herself come to know. He nods slowly and apologizes, saying that he forgets her position. To which she replies that she does as well. They were silent again until a messenger burst through the tent flap, announcing a summons. Biliath to Kabar's camp. She swallowed the pit that suddenly found itself in her stomach and exchanged looks with Haram. In Kabar's tent, he picks at a roasted cut of meat in front of him, barely acknowledging Biliath's presence, while asking her if she's heard the casualty report from last night. He states that the casualties are unfortunate, but inevitable, and he questions the efficacy of the plans that she and General Haram are devising if these are the consequences. But of course, those things are their domain. Biliath silences the scream she wanted to let out, and he continues, stating that they need a relief force, and asking how quickly she can make it to Amoni Ram. Her heart stopped, struck by a bolt of wild hope. She willed it back to life, not wanting to betray the momentary lapse in impassion. She replies that if she hurries and is able to catch a good wind, 4 days, or perhaps 3. Kabar asks if Haram will be able to hold the line without her, and she nods, silently, not wanting to say anything that might convince him to change his mind.
Okay, so obviously he's come to the realization that he's losing too many men too quickly, and they're not going to win this siege, so he wants to send her back for more troops.
He thought for a moment, then motioned her to a ceramic data cylinder.
Again, I mean, I understand that, right? Like, some of these, there's always, in every story, there's going to be certain kinds of, loopholes and things like that. But for me, it honestly, it makes me, it's kind of hard to think that the Meccans, honestly, wouldn't have been able to just utterly decimate the other two factions. I mean, I guess it also depends on the other two factions, like magical capabilities, right? But you're talking about a faction with technology to create cold fusion, which is something that was like the holy grail of energy, right? So they would have, I mean, they have people that are able to fly, so they would have flying capabilities. So they would more than likely be able to create again some kind of flying jets, bombers, fighters, etc. Uh, and have capabilities that the other two factions don't seem to have. Not to mention, they would have nuclear capabilities, so they could literally nuke the shit out of the other two factions and just wipe them off the planet if they wanted to. And being that it's cold fusion, there would be none of the fallout from it, etc. Um, and then, of course, troop number wise, right? You would think they have automata, so they could just sit there and literally just manufacture, as long as they have resources to do it, foulade, metal, iron, whatever they want to make it out of. They could literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, be pumping out automaton soldiers and just win the war from a manufacturing point of view. Like, that's really one of the reasons why the Allied forces won in World War II, was we were just literally able to out manufacture the Germans. Like, the Germans had superior technology and great fighters, but we had numbers and the capability, and we just made more of everything. We had more guns, more bullets, we had more tanks. Even though they had better tanks, we were just able to make more of them and just out manufacture them. So even on that level, I feel like the Mechans would just be able to out manufacture. They would be able to just keep making more numbers. They could produce more, automata and soldiers and things, more than, obviously humans could breed. So the Davites eventually would, run out of numbers. Sarkics as well. I mean, I don't know how the Sarkics, with their, you know, primal stuff, how they make their troops. We haven't gotten into that yet, but I don't know. To me, it would just seem like with the level of technology that the Mechans have, that they would be able to really decimate the other two factions. The only real question mark would be is how powerful of a magics would the other two factions be able to put forward to kind of even the playing field. But even so, like, again, you're talking about a faction with, you know, nuclear and even beyond nuclear technologies. That, I mean, if they have the capability of cold fusion, they might even have the capabilities of creating antimatter. And I mean, antimatter weapons, that's like planet killer stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, so she's going back to Amon to try to rally more troops, is what it sounds like this is going to.
They're sitting on a table. He tells her to deliver the reinforcement orders to General Moline at the garrison in Amoni Ram, but not to wait to lead the relief force here, as he wants her back here as soon as possible. She may trust Haram to lead, but he does not. Her heart was singing. She stomped it down and nodded obediently, dispassionately. Kabar rose from his seat, approaching her. She stood ramrod straight and death still as he raised her chin with a foulard finger. He tells her to take comfort, as the sooner this siege ends, the sooner he returns to Amoni Ram, a conqueror, with her at his side. His father will formally abdicate the throne to him, and he will be free to take his Shahansha as his concubine, as is his birthright. Crown Empress, if she's good. She nodded, eyes lowered, as it was the only way he wouldn't see the burning rage in her eyes. She thanks him, stating that she looks forward to it, and he dismisses her, returning to his meal. I don't know how you suffer him, really. Haram's words echoed in her head from the moment she ran full tilt to the edge of the camp and leaped off the cliff, wings spreading wide to catch the updraft and rocketing her high into the air, to the hours spent utterly alone, gliding along the desert winds with the hawks and the falcons as the dunes shifted endlessly beneath her, left behind in record time. I don't know how you suffer him, really. It bounced around her as the desert below gave way to farms and sandstone houses, and then she crested a vast hill, and then it was in front of her. Amoni Ram, Gate of the West, Adatum's Answer, high walls
Well, they have cold fusion energy in Amon Ram. Cold fusion is nuclear power without the negative side effects of the fallout, essentially. Um, so yeah. So like they would be able to make, nuclear weapons that wouldn't have any of the negative side effects. And again, maybe even potentially having, to the level of being able to create antimatter reactions, maybe they're even at that level, which, you know, theoretically, again, that's like planet killer stuff. That's, the potential to destroy planets with antimatter explosions, etc.
surrounding the city and sunlight reflecting off the sky-scraping towers, gleaming bronze and proud, off the shimmering foulade of the palace's facades, off the armor of a new legion marshaled outside the city gates, blinding sunlight forcing her to cover her eyes as she swept into the city of her birth, the city she loved,
Damn, she got
the
there
city
quick.
she'd left behind.
Hold on, I want to rewind this.
Gave way to farms and sandstone houses of the camp and leaped off the cliff, wings spreading wide to catch the updraft and rocketing her high into the air, to the hours spent utterly alone, gliding along the desert winds with the hawks and the falcons.
I was gonna say she got there quick, which then would lead me to again what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, their capabilities of being able to transport troops around. Again, they have technology of flight. You would think they'd be able to move mass troops around pretty easily and be able to outflank and outmaneuver the other factions. The only other thing, as again that I had stated, you would think the Davites, with their capabilities of their biomancy, could create, root systems that could carve out tunnels underground, and then you could get into kind of like what happened in the Vietnam War, where, the Meccans have superior technology and they can sit there and keep bombarding the surface, but the Davites can move underground and, have a prolonged guerrilla warfare kind of situation, etc., etc.
As the dunes shifted endlessly beneath her, left behind in record time. I don't know how you suffer him, really. It bounced around her as the desert below gave way to farms and sandstone houses, and then she crested a vast hill, and then it was in front of her. Amoni Ram, Gate of the West.
I mean, it sounds like it didn't take, from the description they said hours, so hours that could be, up to your interpretation. But to me, when I say hours, that's not days, right? So if she's able to fly fast enough to where she's able to get from where she was encamped on the front lines back to Amon Ram in less than a day, right? Again, then troop transport wise, I mean, having a vast number of troops and moving them quickly is a lot different than one, person being able to fly at, close to Mach speed or whatever to get back to make a report. But still, you would think that they would be able to rally a number of troops, fly them back to the front lines in a day or two, kind of a situation. Maybe.
Adatum's Answer. High walls surrounding the city and sunlight reflecting off the sky-scraping towers, gleaming bronze and proud, off the shimmering foulade of the palace's facades, off the armor of a new legion marshaled outside the city gates, blinding sunlight forcing her to cover her eyes as she swept into the city of her birth.
I mean, a lot of that I'm sure is stuff that's left up to interpretation. To sit there and really like write a story and like really get into military capabilities, you could do that. And I'm sure some people, I would be one of those people that would love to hear it. But I would assume the mass people that enjoy the SCP stuff They're not here for that. They're here for the story and the lore and the actual tale. They don't necessarily need to know or want to know the actual breakdown of troop movements and numbers of forces and the forces capabilities and what these guys could do against these guys and how they could retaliate and that's stuff that I would like to know, but you know.
The city she loved, the city she'd left behind.
Yeah.
She swung low through the air, abandoning the birds, coming in over the city walls where the guardsmen greeted.
And I mean, that's where my mind goes. Not that I'm any kind of like military strategist or tactician, you know what I'm saying? I've never been to war nor commanded people in battle, etc. But it is where my mind goes with a lot of these things, is thinking about their capabilities and stuff. And that's why I bring up some of these questions, you know? Because to me, again, repeating what I've said, when you have a civilization that is more advanced thousands of years ago than what we currently have in modern times as far as technology goes, right? Like they have better nuclear capabilities than what we currently have, essentially. Maybe even farther. It's an experimental piece of technology, but they literally have the capability of teleporting an entire mass city from one location to another, even to the point of creating a pocket dimension for it to hide in, right? Like, that's crazy technology, brother. So I don't know. It's just, to me, it's kind of hard to think about, like, when they're talking about terms of war and battle and them still using spears and stuff like that, which is fine, right? Like, they could use like highly technological spears that, you know, are also guns, but when they get into close range, they could still be used as spears and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. It just feels like it's just kind of strange to think about like how high level of technology they are, but they're using essentially Bronze Age like military war tactics kind of a situation. You know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah.
Greeted her with a cheer and a salute. She returned. I don't know how you suffer him, really. It raced in her head as she raced, wings spread through the alleys formed from.
And I don't want to like say that this is a fault of the author of the stories in any way. You know, I don't want to be like, I could write a better story than this person can because I'm thinking about these things. That's not the kind of point that I'm trying to make at all. You know what I'm saying? It's just, this is where my mind goes when we're talking about, you know, these factions at war. And my mind just goes into what I know of like our real world history of wars and what I know of World War II and, you know, past wars and things like that, and the capabilities of the Allies and the Germans and the Russians and the Japanese, etc., and how certain battles took place and, you know, etc., etc. And then like thinking about the kind of capabilities that these sides would have. It just seems like the Meccans would be able to like really decimate anyone else at this point in time.
From the sandstone and foulade and steel buildings. The crowd spread out beneath her. More refugees than normal, maybe, but still happy crowds, reassured that they were safe in the greatest city on Earth, as they partook in the bazaars and prayers to Meccain and 10,000 other things that the metropolis offered.
And I mean, maybe that's part of it, right? Maybe the religious side of things and their devotion to Meccan in certain ways, and how their belief in Meccan, and how maybe Bamaro's visions, or you know, how he's communicated with Meccan, etc. Maybe that's part of that situation. Maybe they're doing things in certain ways because that's what Meccan expects of them. You know, I don't know, but that could be a very reasonable explanation for some of that.
They looked up as her winged form shot overhead, weaving around pipes and about corners. I don't know how you suffer him, really. It dominated her thoughts as she quickly found herself at the garrison.
Well, and I mean, the thing with the Black Star, right, is he is like a literal theoretically like powerful reality bender, right? So like even if you throw nuclear weapons at them, like he could essentially bend reality in a way to where the nukes no longer exist. The explosions never happened. Like when I think of reality benders and you're talking about someone that is the most powerful reality bender, like that the foundation at this point is seen in the story. Like he's able to literally sink continents after sitting for a few days and, powering up like Goku or whatever. Um, yeah, I don't know what kind of capabilities you would really be able to do against that other than having another reality bender and them having a reality off. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know.
Filled with armored soldiers and officers, finding a meeting with the general in residence and handing over the memory cylinder before apologizing, but she really had to go now, and she would be more than happy to discuss the news from the front tomorrow over tea. And then taking her leave, again into the air, but this time away from the garrison and away from the palace, to a familiar skyscraper. She landed, hanging from the building's side, one hand gripping the metal frame of the window as she folded her wings, popped the latches on the glass, and clambered in. And the thought departed from her head entirely when, rounding a corner in the expensively decorated apartment, she laid eyes on the tall, thin man as he turned from the books he was poring over. His mouth fell open in surprise, even as his eyes lit up, and she rushed him, catching him in a bone-crushingly tight hug as he did the same.
So she has someone else that she loves, but she is essentially going to be betrothed to this prince, is also what seems like is happening here.
Ansul Bamaro, second prince of Amoni Ram.
We kind of have a little Troy situation going on here where she's going to belong to one prince, but the other prince is the one that she really loves, and he really loves her. I see where this is going. Okay.
High scholar of the imperial cult, the White Prince kissed his beloved. The palace complex at the heart of Amoni Ram was a vast, labyrinthine thing. It spiraled out from the central throne room. It contained hundreds of rooms and dozens of courtyards, beautiful lush gardens, before the war of course, masterful artworks and mosaics commissioned from craftsmen and artisans across the empire. One could spend a lifetime inside and not see everything it had to offer. Ansul had left at 16. He preferred the relative peace and privacy of one of the grand towers. It gave him quiet, solitude time to focus on his studies and his works. His parents had been unhappy, but Kabar had argued on his behalf. His older brother had taken their father aside, telling him the boy needed time to come into himself, just as Kabar had found himself on the battlefield. Ansul was no warrior. They both knew that much. He might as well give him the space he needed to discover what he was instead. The Emperor, still sound of mind back then, had grudgingly let him go. He was still in the city, close enough for the Imperial Guard to keep an eye on. The boy would return sooner or later anyway. That had been 15 years ago. Now the apartment had only expanded, Ansul taking over the entire floor and converting it into his study and workspace. Every spare scrap of space was occupied by an ancient text or stone tablet or innovation in progress. Steel and copper and foulade constructions and wires, their states of completion as unknown as their purpose. He hurriedly cleared some off of a long chaise, guiding her to a seat. He rushed around the messy kitchenette, grabbing a crystal pitcher of clean water and 2 metal cups. Ansul remarks that he wasn't told that she was coming, otherwise he would have prepared, but she smiles and says that she didn't know either, as it was an unexpected change in plans. He asks if that means the siege has broken and she's coming home, his hopeful face making her heart sink.
Nope. Opposite.
She replies that no, Tombarat's walls are as strong as ever. He then asks how that can be, as Haram has had a chokehold on the city for almost half a year now, and he can't imagine any city being able to hold out against him for long. He talked about Haram with an affectionate lilt in his voice. The general had practically raised the boys after the Emperor's illness, though they hadn't seen each other in years now.
That's interesting that, again, well, all of their technological capabilities, illness is still a factor in their society. Maybe it's a situation where it's a mental thing, right? Like, the human side of the body, the brain just might be deteriorating, kind of a situation. And it's just an inevitability that they can't fix without, like, essentially affecting who that person is as an individual. And that might be why they created the Golden Throne situation anyway, so that he could download his knowledge and consciousness into whatever repository they have, and then when their sons come to power, he essentially puts consciousness into their body. So
he replies that they
that would be a logical reason as why a technology like that would be created.
Aren't free to command their forces as they see fit. But Ansul says that the Deva still should have long since raised the flag of surrender and opened the gates. Biliath then replies that there will be no surrender, and when Ansul asks what she means, she hesitates, and he picks up on it. She explains that Prince Kabar has given the order for no quarter, so there will be no surrender, no negotiation, no prisoners. Ansul's brow.
I mean, yeah, it seems like it's definitely a technology that only the Emperor has available to him. Or, I mean, maybe it is something that they utilized, but we only know it from, like, this perspective of the Golden Throne. Like, maybe they had other means of doing something similar for other Mechanites. And it's just, in this story alone, we only really know about the Golden Throne and Bamaro. You know, who knows? But it would also, there is a logic behind thinking that, yeah, this is a technology that would be afforded to the Emperor alone. The Emperor is our leader. He's the one closest to Meccan. You know, Bamaro actually literally has seen Meccan, was touched by Meccan, etc. So we want to preserve him, his consciousness, his knowledge, leadership, etc. by all means.
Furrows, and he asks what happens then when they break the defenses. Her silence said it all. His face fell, and they sat in quiet for a few moments. He asks why he would do that, to which she says she couldn't say. Ansul then says that he's sure that he has his reasons, but there's another lapse into silence, this time broken by Biliath, who says that she was only dispatched here as a messenger to deliver the reinforcement order to the garrison. She told Prince Kabar that she could make it to Amoni Ram in 3 days, but she did it in 2, and she'll need a day of rest before she can make the return journey. Ansul smiles, remarking that it gives them a precious few hours together. He leaned forward, forehead pressed against hers, the foulard fingers of his left hand snaking up and interlocking with hers. She replies that they should make the most of them, fingertips peeling off his craftsman glove and pulling him up off the chaise. When Ansul woke up, it was well into the night. He blinked himself awake, the implant of his left eye quickly cycling itself into motion as he extricated himself from the sheets wrapping around him. In the darkness, he saw a figure on the balcony. Biliath turned her head back as he came up behind her, placing the blanket around her shoulders. He tells her that it's a cold night, and she might catch something,
Hmm.
She nodded once in appreciation, then turned back. They both leaned against the railing of the balcony, looking out at the cityscape. From this high up, Amoni Ram revealed itself as the city of ants that it was. Massive golden towers rising high above a maze-like inner city. Sandstone homes built on temples, built on shops, built on ruins older than anyone alive. Bright electric lights burning and gasping, illuminating the crowds, each man or woman smaller than the head of a pin, but grouping in
It still really does make me wonder, right? Like, is this what Meccan really wanted? Or is this like some kind of human corrupted interpretation of what Meccan wanted when they gave him to Bramara? Like, are humans essentially just parasites taking the Falad and making the city on Meccan's back and corrupting the technology that Meccan wanted for them? Or is it a situation where, like, you know, Meccan imbued him with this knowledge and she was dying, so she's just like, use my body and technology as however you see fit, as long as you uplift humanity, you know, to the enlightenment of technology, kind of a situation.
schools, ceaselessly moving through the boulevards and alleys, a staggering performance of mass civilization.
Yeah, I'm sure that's why there's different versions of, like, or different factions from the Church of the Broken God, is I'm sure there's different interpretations of what all that is.
He comments on the city's beauty, and she replies that it's why she fights. To protect these crowds, these people. To protect this.
Like, isn't there a version of the Broken God that are like super fanatics that like are hardcore wanting to like bring Meccan back into literal existence, and then there's a version of the Church of the Broken God that's like, no, Meccan sacrificed his body to create the cage to entrap Yaldabaoth, so we need to respect that sacrifice, kind of a situation, you know?
Her hands snaked across the railing to clasp his. He tells her that it takes a noble soul to leave their home to protect it from their enemies. They owe her a debt that cannot be repaid, her and every soldier that dies in the campaigns. She sighed, replying that she worries that she'll end up like them, meeting her death in a faraway heathen land, not in the city of her birth. He tells her that she'll be home before long, but she says that it won't be the same.
Will you?
When
though?
she returns home, it will be at the side of a conqueror, as his empress.
Right.
Amoni Ram will not be her home, it will be her domain. Ansul's face fell, and he says that they don't have to think about that now. She smiles sadly, and says that he doesn't have to. He can move on to the next thing, always the next thing. It's nothing for him. Prince Ansul will find a nice girl from the court to marry, eventually. This is a pleasant memory for him to look back on one day. It just hasn't ended yet.
That's a little unfair, right? Like, obviously he loves you and he wants to, you know, be with you. So, like, it's a little unfair to say that he isn't necessarily going through a similar situation where if he had the power to do something about it, he would, you know? Even if he is, you know, he's a prince, so of course he's going to have to eventually marry and have a lineage. But that doesn't mean he's not going to wish he couldn't, you know, done it with you, you know? And I mean, think about how is it going to I know if I was in his situation and I see my, older brother with the woman that I love and them having a family, like, that would destroy me every time I were to, like, interact with them. You know, like, that would be rough.
He shakes his head, arguing that that's not true, but she says that it is. There is no way out of it. He is as bound by his station as she is, and surely he doesn't think that they could carry this on after his brother's coronation. Ansul replies that he could talk to him. They love each other, and he'll have his pick of the court ladies as emperor, so he wouldn't rob his brother of love. Biliath almost
though?
laughed, stating that he hasn't spoken to his brother in years. The front has changed him, made him harder, if such a thing is possible. Ansul counters that that's just the aura he must project as commander, as he cannot allow his troops to see weakness. Biliath replies that there is hardness and there is cruelty. The troops fear him, and she would as well if she wasn't able to rein back his worst ideas. She turned to look at her lover. He was distracted, fumbling with a small contraption made of drilled, burnished brass, stubby and cylindrical with a dish at the end. He crumbled something brown into the dish, then placed the other end into his mouth and lit a fire, melting whatever it was. When he exhaled again, it was heavy and tinged with red. He offered it to
Man smoking some methane weed over here? What is this?
her gently, and she took a puff. It dulled the aching pains across her back, if only for a second. She blew the smoke back into his surprised face, and then he was coughing, and then she was laughing, and then they were both laughing and coughing, and the smoke was drifting out across Amoni Ram.
We got the Snoop Dogg of the Meccans over here, man. Like, what the fuck?
They walked through the streets the next morning. Biliath had her meeting with General Maline at the garrison, and Ansul accompanied her. It didn't raise any eyebrows with the soldiers. He was still a prince, after all. It was a surprise to see him take an interest in military matters for once, but not an unwelcome one. The citizens, for their part, were happy just to see two paragons of the city out and about. It brought an air of reassurance, countering the silence from the palace. They made their way through the crowd, the two of them surrounded by a light accompaniment from the Imperial Guard. The crowd parted respectfully as they passed, stopping their bartering or purchasing or hawking to bow respectfully before the prince. The guardsmen saluted the Shahansha as she passed. Ansul fidgeted awkwardly at the endless cavalcade of bows, remarking to Biliath that you'd think once would be enough. She replies that they don't see his father anymore, so their expectations in him fall to Ansul. He believes that to be unfair, as he's denied the role enough times already. If he wanted to rule, he would have asked his father to grant him a governance. She tells him that there's some duties you can't deny. Governor or not, he is their prince, and that comes with certain responsibilities. He believes that if this is what it means to be prince, then he's more than happy to let Kabar be the heir. She reminds him gently that Prince Kabar is not here, and he is. He replies by simply saying, "Unfortunately." She was glad the reverence from the crowd was loud enough to mask the hiss she let out. She stamped it down. A stupid, thoughtless comment. Nothing more. She put it outside of her mind until they arrived at the garrison. It was a vast, hulking complex in the western quarter of the city. High towers, gates manned by soldiers. On the plazas, daily drills and fitness checks were occurring, armored soldiers in formation marching and slashing their blades through the air in perfect synchronization with the drums. Officers shrieked out orders that quickly became "kneel" as the Shahansha and the prince passed. She pulled one such officer aside, asking him where General Maline is. He replies that he's in the infirmary, but he doesn't know his condition. She released him and made a beeline for the infirmary, Ansul following earnestly behind. It was another large building. It had once been smaller, but recently it had been forced to integrate the surrounding buildings for need of space. She tried not to think about what that signified as she entered. The stench of stale blood and urine was immediate.
Yikes.
She turned to Ansul, asking if he would like to wait outside, making sure to refer to him as her lord, as she was acutely aware of the presence of the Imperial Guard listening in. Ansul replies that he's quite alright, so they carry on through the tiled corridors of the infirmary. Every room they passed contained bodies, most alive, some in more questionable state. Moaning and grunting echoed throughout the halls, of men healing and men dying. Surgeons rushed around them, pausing momentarily as they considered kneeling or saluting before Ansul hurriedly waved them off. A soldier passed by, carried on a stretcher by 2 orderlies. There was a gaping, ragged hole in his chest, turning a sickening yellow at the edges. Ribs.
Again, it makes me wonder, right? Like, they're able to create automaton stuff like that. I mean, it's very possible that they're not able to or haven't thought of, but like nanite technology, right? Like the ability to create, machines on a cellular level that could be in the bodies of their soldiers to repair them, etc., would be extremely beneficial in times of war, allowing them to regenerate, heal, even potentially, grow limbs back, etc., etc. So that hasn't been, anything that's been brought up so far. So seems like they don't have those kind of capabilities, but just makes me it's just something that comes to my mind, right?
Exposed. Struck by the Deva, no doubt. His eyes were fluttering, and he was sucking in air greedily. Ansul whispers Mekane's name, and Biliath calls back to him to not look. It killed her to say it.
Right.
But she knew him. She knew he couldn't handle this. He had always been a softer soul, uninterested in martial affairs and disturbed by the sight of blood.
Like, it kind of feels like Warhammer Fantasy-ish in a way, but in the SCP universe with the SCP factions, the Mechans are like the highly technologically advanced faction, and then the Davites are the nature-based kind of druidic high magic faction, and then from what it sounds like, the Sarkics are kind of the undead vampiric-ish kind of faction. So that's what it feels like.
Everything Kabar wasn't. It was part of why she loved him. Then she found herself face to face with Malin. He was a tall man, bearded, easily a foot and several pounds of muscle over her. Intimidating, but his face broke into a warm smile on seeing her. They exchanged salutes, then he knelt for the prince, who told him to rise, as there's no need for any of that. His face was pale, eyes wide, causing the general to ask him if he's all right. Ansul replies that he's just fine, so Malin nods and turns back to Biliath. He looked through the reinforcement request and says that resources are admittedly tight, but Tambarat must fall if they are to hold the region. He's marshaled the men, and they're gathering outside the western gate, commanded by Kurna. She nodded, as she knew him to be a competent, skilled leader. Malin then lowers his voice, asking, off of the official report, how the siege is progressing.
Not well.
She thought for a second before looking back up at him, eyes hard. She states that she's seen men being commanded into a full front assault with no artillery cover against the gates of the city. She's seen aerial units pushed into suicide missions to destroy such significant targets as a farmer's hut. She's had her soldiers pulled from their camps and drowned in the night, beheaded and poisoned and run through and burned alive. She's had to walk the killing fields where they engage them in the day and use her blade to fulfill the no-quarter order herself because her men are tired of killing defenseless enemies. She's seen Haram and herself ignored time and time and time again for the sake of some imagined glory on the battlefield. She can tell him that there is no glory to be found at Tambarat.
Yep.
Malin pursed his lips and states that He was afraid of that, asking if they can pull back, but she says no. At this point, they're dug in, and any siege in the winter will be even harder because the Deva will be prepared for it. The defenses will be even further hardened.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like the Davites are holding out for, is for winter, so that they can essentially have weakened the Meccans during this time, and then they can pull a counteroffensive against them.
They wasted their golden opportunity. Now the only thing they can do is absorb the losses and try to end it as fast as they can. Biliath didn't lower her voice. She was acutely aware of Ansul behind her, quietly listening in the whole time. They were leaning against the outside of the western wall, some shade from the overhangs. It was a public spot, perhaps risky, but the reinforcements marshalling outside had departed some hours ago, and there was no one left around. The watchman on top of the wall couldn't see them in this nook, holding each other before she had to take to the skies again, to leave Amoni Ram once more. Biliath, the tip of her nose pressed against his, tells him that she hopes he understands now what she's protecting him from, that kind of horror and bloodshed, so he shouldn't say, unfortunately, that he's here instead of at the front. It was a soft admonishment, but a firm one, and she tells him that this is where he belongs, and that is where she belongs. He went quiet for a moment, before apologizing, saying that that's not what he meant. He meant that it was unfortunate that Kabar is at the front, causing both of them to go quiet. She asks if he understands then, and he replies that he's his brother. He loves him, but he understands how he can be, reckless and aggressive. She says that he's grown worse. He sends soldiers to suicide pushes for no reason other than to spite and distract the enemy. He refuses to listen to her or the other generals, and men die in droves as a result. She worries that she can't keep reining him in. He sighs and asks what choice do they have. Haram's words hung in her head, but she stamped them out and kissed the man she loved. She was coasting through the air back to Tambarat when she first smelled it. Smoke. It was just the slight, bitter odor at first. Then it was everywhere, filling the air, filling her nose and her lungs, choking. She lapsed into a coughing fit, losing control of her glide, spiraling back down to earth. She barely managed to lift herself out of the dive at the last minute, landing on her shoulder. She heard the shearing of metal and cringed before her mind returned to the present. She was in a field of burning bodies. Corpses arranged neatly in rows and columns, coated in oil, burning, the stench of charred flesh inescapable.
Jesus.
Biliath covered her nose and mouth, looking down at the Deva. Except they weren't Deva. These were humans, men stripped of their armor, most missing one limb or another, gold peeking through fissures in the skin. These were mechanites. And then the realization dawned on her in increasing horror. These were her mechanites, her men, her soldiers. She recognized their faces, the same faces she'd led into battle and rescued and commanded and dragged from the field. They were dead, burning, all killed the same way. Throats slit. The fires baked the blood.
Sounds like there was an attempted coup that went wrong, and they were all rounded up and killed and burned alive.
To a dark stain on their brown skin. 200 at least. More behind the pillars of thick black smoke. Her jaw clenched. She hears her name from behind her, coming from Haram, and she turns, hands shaking with rage. He explains that after she left, Kabar ordered an assault on the city's weakest flank, the southeastern side of the city. She blinked, stating that that's directly across the water. Haram replies that it would require fording the river, and it would be a risky, dangerous, stupid maneuver under these conditions, fit only for a brute. So of course, he ordered them to, and they rebelled. Haram looked out across the field of burning bodies before continuing. Her men told him that they wouldn't do it without their general there to lead them. They refused to get into formation, so he brought his cohort and the Imperial Guard down on them. Kabar had said that they fight or they're put to the sword. But of course, killing a quarter of your forces is too stupid even for him. So instead, once order was restored, he issued the order. Every unit selects one man among them and kills them. Her vision was blurry.
I think that's what it was, right? The like Roman punishment for this in this kind of situation. I think it was called decimation. I could be wrong though.
Fury mixed with adrenaline, mixed with soot. She remarks in disbelief that he had them stripped, not referring to their clothes, but rather their prostheses. Burying a soldier without his arms and legs was among the greatest insults, reserved only for traitors. Her voice shakes as she says that all he had to do was wait a single day. She would have come back and led the charge. Haram replies that he's an animal, and with the Emperor comatose, he's broken his leash. They stood there for some time, the only sound the crackling of the fires. He asks if she sees it, a vision.
So it's looking like, yeah, this story is going to be leading towards her creating a plan to kill this prince.
Of the future under this emperor. Citizens put to the sword if they don't take up arms. The Imperial Guard treating women and children as they do enemies. Nothing but constant war. He was right. She could see it, rendered in perfect detail. Kabar on the Fulad throne, completely unstoppable. The Legion under his direct command, conscripting boys barely old enough to shave. Herself relegated to the life of a bird in a gilded cage in a burning house, watching him drive the Empire into ruin, helpless to do anything but cry out to deaf ears. Ansul quietly killed or put in the dungeons to consolidate his rule. Amoni Ram burning just like the bodies of her soldiers, smoke spiraling up into the air endlessly. She gasped through the choking ash and states that it cannot be allowed to happen. Haram agrees, simply, that it can't, and she asks him what they should do. Haram replies dispassionately that they should do the same thing you do with any animal that's broken its leash.
Down.
You cut it down before it does any more damage.
Yeah. No, I think we're actually going to stop there for today. We'll pick up with chapter 2 next time. We've already been going for quite a while here. So yeah. That was Amon Ram Fratricide, the first chapter in this very long tale by the Exploring series. So yeah, we'll cut this one up here and check out what's gonna happen in chapter 2 here next time, because this is still another like hour long, I think, for the next chapter, etc., etc. So links down below to the Exploring series channel, as always, in the description. So if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to go over here, give it a like, and hit that sub button on his channel. Very interesting so far. I mean, I like these kind of stories and these kind of tales. We're getting into more of a situation where like the idea of the Meccans we're not really kind of like this unified culture, I guess. And just like any human culture, you know, there's good people and bad people. And we have the story of a prince here who seemingly is just out for glory, you know, and it seems like his military tactics are to just throw as many bodies at the enemy as possible. Like basically kind of old school revolutionary Civil War style of throw as many bodies at the enemy as possible and numbers win kind of a situation. Doesn't really care about them, and they haven't really gotten to why. You know, there was that brief story at the beginning of a prince, you know, one of the princes injuring another one. So maybe this is part of that, you know? It kind of is like a clue of the past leading to, I guess, the present in the story of maybe this prince is just a cruel person, messed up in the head, sadistic, doesn't care. But it seems like he's trying to get this war over with quickly, go home, you know, get the praises of his people. His father is no longer really in charge. So he wants to return triumphant over the Davites to claim the throne, and take his glory along with it, you know, etc., etc. That sounds like where this is going. And then obviously, you know, the woman who is the main character of the story, I'm bad with names, so I don't remember her name, is in love with the other prince, who seems like a better human being, but he's not a warrior and a leader, essentially, from the sounds of it. And, you know, she is tasked to return to Amoni to rally more numbers, get some more troops to come and help end the siege. She returns to the front with a decent number of her men who refused and essentially basically kind of mutinied, and were executed. They did the Roman decimation tactic of one in every, you know, so many people. They put them aside, take them out of the group, and execute them as an example of what happens when you you know, don't follow orders. So yeah, interested to see where this is going. I mean, the title is Fratricide, so I'm assuming that this is going to lead to her creating a plot to kill this prince, obviously, and probably I feel like it's probably going to be a situation where she attempts to do that, fails, and then the younger prince, who is not the warrior, you know, ends up becoming enraged because that is the love of his life, and then he ends up you know, rallying people to his side, and there ends up being maybe some kind of Meccan civil war that goes on between them as they both bid for power. And, you know, I guess we'll see what happens. So but yeah, this was I guess the first chapter in this long tale. So looking forward to seeing where this is going to go for more. Thank you guys for watching. If you you know, want to take your support to the next level, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership membership benefits, etc., that I have to offer. So if you want to take your support to the next level, check all that stuff out. If you enjoyed my video here with my commentary and reaction, you know, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me the channel grow. And yeah, we'll see you guys on the next one. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day. Thank you for watching here to the very end if you're still here, and I hope you have a good one.